2. Zechariah. And God willing, we'll get through 2 and 3. So, unless I'm interrupted by thousands of questions, or at least 2. I know what it's all about. It's beautiful outside. The weather's been great. So let's pray. Father God, we thank you for this evening. Thank you for the kids as they served us dinner. They did a great job, and we're so blessed to be having these kids that are dealing with Awana and learning verses and learning about your Son and learning to serve tonight, Father. We thank you for that. Thank you for all those in the other parts of this building that are dealing with the children. And as we go to you tonight, we want to hear the plan that you have for this wonderful nation of Israel, and that how it will pan out, because your word never fails. And Father, as we look at this, it helps us to understand a lot that's happened as your Son came at his first advent, and that the kingdom will be established at his second advent. We thank you again for this time, in Jesus' name, amen. I think we left off really in a weird place last week, so we're going to pick up at verse 6. If you have a King James, it reads a little bit better in King James. Does anybody have a King? That's really cool. Would you get it? Look in Zechariah chapter 2, verse 6, and tell me what the first 2 words are. I think it should... Up? It says, what does yours say? Ho, ho. Verse 6 starts off, ho, ho. It's like the Santa verse, isn't it? What? I lift up? No, King James is ho, ho. New King James? All right. I know for a fact. Here's what I know for a fact. In the Hebrew, it's oi, oi. So you just ho ho, ho ho. Okay. We're going to read these verses. So let's read verse 6, 7, and we'll just do 6 and 7 first, because it's interesting how it reads here. It almost feels like Santa. It says, "Ho there, flee from the land of the north, declares the Lord, for I have dispersed you as the 4 winds of the heavens, declares the Lord. Ho, Zion, escape, you who are living with the daughter of Babylon." So again, what's happening is, remember, they're coming back from being in Babylon. They have been scattered. They have been under captivity, and they've been offered this time by God to come back, to come out of Babylon, to return back to the promised land. And not too many people have answered that call back. It's interesting, this word ho is the word oi, basically, in the Hebrew. It's used 47 times. Listen to this. This is so cool. This is when you look up words and you see certain things. This is really neat. It's used only from 790 BC to 520 BC. That's the only time period you'll find it in. It's used in Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Amos, Micah, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, and Zechariah. And you say, oh, that's just great stuff. But the interesting thing is, he uses right here, 3 times, and within these 2 verses. And out of those 47 times, Zechariah uses it quite a few times. But here's the interesting thing. When we look in the New Testament, that same word for woe is translated in the Hebrew as oi. So it's a woe kind of thing. Let me read you a Jewish prayer that'll give you a kind of an understanding. Okay, a Jewish prayer says this: "Let's pray that God sends us Mashiach already, so we can stop waxing eloquent about our woes and expand our vocabulary to positive interjections." And if you know anything about the Hebrew people, the word oi is used quite often, and it's basically they're saying, "Whoa, woe is me." And it's kind of a funny thing, because it's basically they want Messiah to come so they can wax eloquently with positive interjections, which is what a voice of praise kind of idea. So when we look here in verses 6 and 7, as it opens up, with this idea. Up until this time, very few have returned. I know there's a count 42,360, I think it was. And we probably could look at Ezra at some point. I don't plan on doing it tonight, but Ezra chapter 2 gives a delineation of who returned. And there was other returns, but I mean, you think 43,000 was what, a tiny city, right? I mean, really, just not very many people. Look at Isaiah real quick, get a feel for the return. Isaiah chapter 40. And we're going to go to a few places tonight, so be prepared, especially when we get to chapter 3. And again, what we're looking at all these visions that Zechariah has at night. And this vision is the man with the measuring line. We didn't finish it last week, and he's setting the size of the city and measuring out the city. And in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 11, it says this, "Like a shepherd he will tend his flock. In his arm will he gather the lambs and carry them in his bosom. He will gently lead the nursing ewes. Who has measured the waters in the hollows of his hand and marked off the heavens by the span, and calculated the dust of the earth by the measure, and weighed the mountains in the balance and the hills in a pair of scales." So again, what it's talking about is the Jews were put in various nations, and God knows where everyone's at. He's got them numbered. They seem to be comfortable, and this is it's difficult today because we have Jews scattered on all the world, and a lot of them are comfortable where they're at, and I'll be honest, I'm one of them, and they're not interested in returning to Israel. I don't have a real interest to return, but we're going back to this time period when they're called to return. What did Zechariah open up with? Remember Zechariah chapter 1, verse 3, "Therefore he says to them, thus says the Lord of hosts, return to me." So God is beckoning them to return to him. I don't think that beckon is in this age that we're in today. What's happened, though, here's what's happened, so you can kind of get the understanding. The Jews had assimilated. When we talk about immigration today, people come into this country, and we don't have the assimilation we used to have. My grandparents all came from Russia. Within a generation, they assimilated. They learned the language. You couldn't tell their background. They kind of lost their heritage, for whatever good or bad that is. We have people come in today that they establish their areas. We have Little Havana, we have Chinatown, we have so on and so forth, where they've brought their heritage in and want us to assimilate with them. But here what we have is, remember from Daniel, and if you're really familiar with Daniel, when the young kids were exported out, when they were brought into captivity, they changed their names, they re-educated them, they taught them what they wanted them to, which was a good education system. Don't think it was bad. They were very learned. The Chaldeans are very smart people. Smart enough to know that if we want to assimilate the next generation, is educate the kids where they can learn from 6th grade probably up to middle high school, like 9th, 10th grade. After that, they know everything. Juniors and seniors, they know everything, right? But it's true. There is a point where kids can be taught. And I think Daniel was young, maybe 11 or 12 when he was taken into captivity. And they were taught that. And when we get to the time when Ezra comes back, a few years after Zechariah, nobody even knows the Hebrew language. So we have a return 70 years later, and nobody knows the Hebrew language except probably Ezra and some of the priestly line. Maybe Zechariah knew the Hebrew language, but it hadn't been preserved. So Ezra opens up the Word to read to them. So they stood for hours listening while he read because they couldn't read it. They couldn't understand. Of course, it wasn't available to all anyway. But God, by this assimilation, though, they also found a comfort zone that they said, why should we go back? What was in Jerusalem? What was in the Promised Land? Everything had been devastated by war. Nobody likes to go back to that kind of a situation. But basically, God's telling them and beckoning here in chapter 2 to leave your comfort, leave your present comforts, and return to Jerusalem. And again, when you get to Ezra and some of Nehemiah, you'll see that they'll give accounting of who's returning, and it's not a lot of people. And In Jeremiah 51, I can read it, but you can turn there if you want. Jeremiah 51, verse 6. And remember, Jeremiah would end up his captivity in Egypt. And in Jeremiah 51, I'm going to have to throw this thing off. I can't turn pages with a Band-Aid. Can you believe that? Jeremiah 51, verse 6. It says, "Flee from the midst of Babylon, and each one of you save his life." So what Jeremiah's pleading with them is to flee out of Babylon, save your life. And that's not talking just physical life. There was nothing there in Babylon. Babylon is very pagan. "Do not be destroyed in her punishment, for this is the Lord's time of revenge. He is going to render recompense to her." And if you remember from the second vision we talked about, the four horns and the four artisans, is now Babylon was going to be destroyed. And if you think of war, there are casualties that are not part of just Babylon. And God says, you need to get out because it's going to be bad for Babylon. The Persians are coming, kind of thing. Here in Jeremiah he's talking about. And we know from history that Darius the Mede would come in and invade Babylon, and he doesn't care who gets hurt. You know, we're very worried. We're very politically correct as America today. We're worried about fallout and casualties of war and non-combatants and innocents. They weren't. And if you even go back to the Old Testament, God wasn't either. When God said go into a town, He said go in and what? Destroy man, woman, child, dog, cat, whatever. Just annihilate it. Because why? It was prevalent in them that they would pollute the Hebrew people, and God didn't want any remnant of that around. But God had made and promised Israel a homeland in the Promised Land, and He wanted them to come back to their homeland, free from where you are, and go home. Today, sometimes I think a lesson would be for us is we too are sometimes too wrapped up in the world. Think of what 1 John says. Don't love the world or the things in the world. And when we're called to be a separate people, we're supposed to be called out from that. We're not supposed to be involved in those worldly exploits. And what happened is Israel was a holy people. He had called them that, and you couldn't tell them apart. You couldn't tell. And God did have a place for Daniel. There's nothing wrong with that. But the people were called to come back. And God scattered Israel all in and here's what God did. God scattered them all during the Babylon captivity. He scattered them into that area for punishment, and the Babylonians had taken their ability to be God's instrument too far. And God was now going to judge the Babylonians with the Medes and Persians, and Israel needed to go to the safety of the Promised Land. Remember, God has always promised the people of Israel at that time, not today necessarily, and there'll be another time when He does, that He will be in their midst and He will protect them. Remember, we talked a little bit about He would be the walls, He would be the fire, the one that would judge around them. And this is continuing on that idea. Israel needs to return to the Promised Land basically to get out of harm's way. So there's some safety in that environment. I really think there's a hint of that today. How many people have tried to invade Israel since, at least in my memory, since 48 and got away with it? You know, just think about it. Who's won? Anytime you win, it's at the table and Israel's given something back. But when it comes to war, Israel wins those wars. The Lord basically is saying to them, I'm going to watch over you as a people. You need to run home. And that's kind of the idea behind verses 6 and 7. So as we looked at that in Zechariah chapter 2, verse 6 and 7, get the idea they need to come home. They need to go to a place where they're supposed to be. Remember, that's their land. Verses 8 and 9, and this is the reason why they need to return. Verses 8 and 9, for thus says the Lord of hosts, after glory He has sent me against the nations which plunder you. For he who touches you touches the apple of his eye. For behold, I will wave my hand over them, so they will be plunder for their slaves. Then you will know that the Lord of hosts has sent me. So again, it's interesting. What does he mean by after glory? What does he mean about that time period? Now here's the hard part. When we're in these minor prophets, he's really talking about kingdom understanding. So if you're sitting here in Zechariah and you're getting this read to you, this taught to you at the time of Zechariah, you're thinking a kingdom's coming. We're looking at it, and we've got two issues going on. Christ has already came, and Christ is coming again. And I think sometimes we get lost in that idea. When Christ came the first time, what was he coming to do? I heard, save us. Okay, see, this is where we need a kingdom perspective. When Jesus came the first time, nobody ever argued with him that he wasn't king. Nobody ever argued with him and said that he wasn't doing a kingdom or setting up. Everything was about a kingdom. Think about the mentality. If you read Matthew, what's it about? He will what? He will save his people from his sins, but the first thing Mary's told is he will be on his throne of his father David. That's about a kingdom. Nobody ever said, oh no, that was never, it's only going to be a kingdom in your heart. That kingdom perspective is a physical kingdom was coming. So when we look at this, when we say after glory, it was always after the Messiah came. Now we know because we have a better perspective, which makes it hard because we know that his glory came because he died, buried, rose again, ascended, and he will return with that glory because he said what? Give me in his high priestly prayer, he said, give me the glory that I had with you originally, Father. So he's going to return in that glory, and we have Revelation that tells us what that return is going to be like. But when he returns, guess what he's doing? He's setting up the kingdom. So understand this. So when he's saying, here after the glory, they're thinking kingdom. Just so you can know what's going on. They're thinking kingdom. And that when you see the plunder of the nations, he's setting up his kingdom. The problem is they didn't have a perspective that we have of all the different kingdoms that would come and which kingdom we're talking about. They only had the perspective Babylon. If Babylon would be destroyed, the Messiah would come. Okay? But remember what he says here. He says, he has sent me against the nations which plunder you. What was Israel's mindset? Did they think they were going to have nation after nation after nation come to plunder them? How many times would it happen? And they would say, Babylon, we're done. You know, and that's why what came first was not only the four horns, to tell you there was more kingdoms, but you got to tie it to the book of Daniel, where Daniel has interprets the dream of Nebuchadnezzar and tells you that there's going to be, and we'll look at this in chapter 3, a stone that will come and crush that last kingdom. Jesus didn't come with a stone the first time. He came offering the kingdom, but it wasn't a stone. The only stone he had was what? Peter, right? Upon this rock I will build my church. Which is interesting because there's a little innuendo there that says, okay, the kingdom is now not offered. It's been rejected. We're moving on with an issue, and that's a whole different time. We'll get into that. But anyway, we see that Jesus will return, and we know that his return will happen in the Mount of Olives. He will set foot there. A picture here is very much a picture, I believe, of the Lord's return to vindicate himself as that Messiah King, as he crushes the nations. And when Jesus is coming back as that king, it's going to be an earthly rule. And I want you to kind of understand this. This earthly rule is going to be very significant. It's not going to be, it's going to be a lot of punitive damages. He's going to separate out nations. It's going to be, there are going to be people that are not saved, but he's going to deal with things immediately. He will rule with a rod of what? Iron. So there's going to have to be some punitive damages, right? And I think if we take this and grab this and go read Matthew when we're done, we could see some very interesting issues as Jesus describes certain things. Not only Matthew, but I think Matthew it stands out more about the kingdom presentation. And what it talks about here, not only in chapter here, but in chapter 3, we'll talk about it a little bit at the end of chapter 3. But in Daniel chapter 2, verse 45, it talks about the stone that is not cut with hands, which will come to crush the nations. So we got to have that idea, because judgment's coming upon the nations. And the only one that could fairly distribute the judgment is the Messiah. Verse 8, he says, the nations which plunder you, which make spoils of you. Here's the interesting thing. The nations that do that to Israel pokes God in the eye. Now, I don't know about any of you all, but playing sports enough times in my life, if you get poked in the eye, that's just, I don't know how to even kind of put it into words. It's not only aggravating, it's annoying, but it makes you very vindictive, I guess is the best way. God's not being vindictive. But it's a soft spot. Not only that, when you say the apple of your eye, that means you care for them. So it's not only something that's happening to God that's demeaning to Him, hurting His people, but He's also caring for them. So there's kind of a couple issues there. In the side column in the NSB, it says the pupil of His eye. But we know the idiom. We've heard the idiom enough, the apple of His eye. And basically, what it's saying is, you touch those people, you're putting a blow on God. And I think we could see that many times in history. Verse 9 says, for behold, I wave my hand over them. Again, showing His care for them. Not that He's waving goodbye, but His hand of the Lord, He protects them. How often has Israel, that we could look in Israel's history from, let's go from Exodus, or we can even go from Abraham to now, how many times have things happened to them that are just miraculous? Think in your lifetime, anybody remember the 6-day war that was supposed to last years and it lasted 6 days? Nobody thought that would last 6 days, right? But and that's miraculous. But if you just look at how God does things and protects Israel. So let's talk about that for a second. What happened by this time is Babylon wasn't just an instrument to bring discipline to the nation of Israel. They had gone way beyond it. They had become basically anti-Semitic. They had persecuted beyond belief these people. So what God is saying is, these people have hurt me by hurting you, and I will deal with them severely. Let's go back for a second. Go to Deuteronomy 32. Deuteronomy 32. I think it's one of the most important chapters in the early part of our Bible for us to get, because this is basically Moses' swan song. I don't know if that's a good way to say it. If you knew you were passing away and your time was done and you were the servant of the Lord as long as Moses had been, what would be your last words? What would you try and get across to the people you led? And this is Moses', I don't know if it's going to come across right, but I think it's his swan song. It's his last, it says it's Moses' song. I don't think he sang it per se. But in verse 9, chapter 32, Deuteronomy 32, verse 9, says this, for the Lord's portion is His people. Jacob is the allotment of His inheritance. He found him in a desert land and in a howling waste of the wilderness. He encircled him. He cared for him. He guarded him as the pupil of His eye. So all the way back to Moses, Moses is saying, what about these people? This is a very protected part of your body. It's God's eyes. These people. Look at how David says in Psalm 17, and this is definitely a song. You don't hear many praise songs about God's apple of God's eye, do you? We'll have to make one. I'm not going to sing it though. But I do have the words, because Psalm 17 verse 8 says this, keep me as the apple of your eye. Now David is the king of Israel. He understands what these people are to God. And he says, keep me as the apple of your eye. Excuse me. Hide me in the shadow of thy wings. So what David is looking at is God's eye is a place well protected. Think about it. You're doing anything, you want to protect your eyes. Doing yard work, cutting wood, whatever you want to protect your eyes. It's It's a sensitive spot, and that's the kind of idea behind it. When we talk here about Israel being the apple of God's eye, it's a wonderful, colorful idiom, because the Lord will protect, has and will always protect His people. And I think we're very protective of our eyes. And basically what he's saying here in verses 8 and 9, you touch Israel, there's going to be judgment and punishment. Just think about it. Think about all the people that have come to harm Israel. Where are they today? And there are going to be more. This is just a cycle of people doing this. I put down here a principle, or kind of a profound statement, whatever you want to call it. No matter what their situation, no matter what the Israel situation is, the Lord has placed Israel in a special position. The individual or the nation that turns against Israel will have to answer to God. It is what it is. I can't go anywhere in Scripture and not see that when you come at Israel in an anti-Semitic way, not because individually you have a problem with a Jew that isn't doing something right, deal with it. It's not giving them right to do anything. But when you come at them with a vehement hate, and you'll see why, because in chapter 3, look at Zechariah chapter 3. Notice whose name is mentioned there. Then he showed me Joshua the high priest standing before the angel of the Lord and Satan. And then the very next verse is, and the Lord said to Satan. So Satan is very involved in this world. And the stem and the root of anti-Semitism is very satanic. So when we look at that, we get a good picture of what's going on. Satan is the allowed rule of this earth right now. But it's only temporary. And we'll look at chapter 3 in a minute, hopefully. Verses 10 through 13 of Zechariah chapter 2 is basically a promise of His coming. And again, when Jesus came, I think I'm going to kind of this is kind of what my area I've kind of been really looking at lately. But when Jesus came the first time, everyone was looking for a kingdom. They were looking for Messiah to set up His kingdom. At that time that Jesus came, Rome was ruling the world and had put up a puppet king over Israel. And Israel understood the Scriptures. How many times did Jesus even say, it is written, or according to the Scriptures? Not only Jesus said it, but Paul said it, and Peter said it. So if they're saying according to the Scriptures, they're assuming there is a familiarity with the Old Testament that we lack sometimes. That's what we're studying Zechariah. And in verse 10 it says, sing for joy and be glad, O daughter of Zion, for behold, I am coming, and I will dwell in your midst. The praise song of Israel is what? The King is coming. That was a pretty good song years ago, right? He's still coming. And when Jesus showed up on the scene, the King was coming. He was there. He was heralded as such. So there's never a doubt. Nobody ever said, take that sign down. You ever notice that? When Jesus was on the cross and it says here, He's King of Kings, King of the Jews, over Jesus' cross. Nobody said, take that sign down. That's not true. There was nobody ever saying, they were only saying crucify Him. Something we can get into at another time. But just think of this. It's a beautiful picture. In spite of what was going on around the people, the temple wasn't completed or being completed. That they were being accosted by Babylon. God still wants them, in spite of their situation, to sing and be glad. Sing for joy and be glad. Which is interesting, because if you're just singing, doesn't mean you're joyful. Doesn't mean you're singing with a smile on your face that you're glad. He's saying the reason for that is what? He's coming. And He will be in their midst. Remember, God's presence had left Israel before the Babylonian captivity. Been gone since Ezekiel chapter 11. Gone. 8, I think. 8 to 11, he was leaving. And now he says, I'm coming. When would you think that is? See, to the Jew, it wasn't 2,000 plus years, or would it be more than that, 2,500 plus years till today. It was, he's coming. It's any minute. Any minute. How often do we say he's coming again and we think, yeah, whenever? Do you see what I'm saying? So it's the application to us is sing and be glad because he's coming. And notice what it says, and once again, the nations will join themselves, verse 11, to the Lord in that day and will become my people. Listen, and many nations will join. You know what we get a picture of? Is Israel is being restored, but so are other nations coming to the Lord. Israel's just what? The priestly nation. They're the head nation. They're ones that are setting the pace. Remember, at some point, if we bring in other verses in this, every man will seek a Jew to learn the word. So that the lead nation are the ones that bring them to the Lord. But he says, I will bring the nations, join the nations to myself to the Lord in that day. And kind of focus on that. It's very important as you look in these prophets. When it says in that day or that day, it's talking about a specific time frame when what? There's a kingdom. So we're talking about a kingdom understanding here. And what? In that day will become my people. Then I will dwell in your midst. And what? You will know that the Lord of hosts has sent me to you. Now when Jesus came the first time, how many people said, hey, the Lord sent you? Jesus did what? How many signs? I think somebody calculated once there was 33 written signs. And then many more that John said couldn't record, wouldn't fit in the books. So let's say 33 signs. What's the chances of somebody doing 33 miraculous signs? I mean, truly miraculous, not hocus pocus, fool you once, fool you twice, 3 times your... These are true, verifiable miracles that nobody could do. He turned water into wine. Think who'd been out of business today? You want wine? Just get some water. Goodbye, Boone's Farm or whatever else there is out there. I know, I just got a few good faces. But if you think about it, Jesus had control over elements and time and everything that's involved to change water into wine. Healing a blind man that everybody knew was blind in John chapter 9. Everybody knew it. Publicly knew it. And his parents wouldn't even say, no, we don't want anything to do it because we're what? We're afraid we're going to be cast out of the synagogue. So as we look at this, God will once again come down, and since he says this, so you've got to grab this. You will know that the Lord of hosts has sent me to you. This is not only a coming, but it's got to be bodily because you've got to know him. You can't just say, well, I think he's in the room. I mean, good Christians will tell you a solid theology is God's always what? Present. It's not a place God's not present. Right? So we don't go in here and say, well, Lord, I hope your presence is here tonight, because that's really what? Not a very theologically sound prayer, because it is. The Lord's presence is here. He is here. But there's a difference between saying he's here and everyone knows it, because we see it. So it's dealing with a bodily return. And Christ will dwell among the people on earth and fulfill the promise not only to return to Jerusalem, but to rule and reign on his throne of his father David. Verse 12. We're going to have some fun with this because it's very interesting. It says, the Lord will possess Judah and his portion in the Holy Land and will again choose Jerusalem. You like that name, Holy Land, right? Holy Land. How many times is that phrased in Scripture? Everybody calls Israel what? The Holy Land. That's got to be prevalent in Scripture. Got to be hundreds of times, right? Because Israel is what? The Holy Land. 2 times it's only used in Scripture. 2 times. Israel's only called, yeah, isn't that kind of cool? You kind of say, well, how did it get the name? Because it is very prevalent that it's the Holy Land. It's only used here and in Psalm 78:54. We're not going to go to it. But that's the only time it's called the Holy Land. And it's interesting as we look at it, and have that idea, how would Zechariah know it's a holy land? Now think about this for a minute. We're talking about the Hebrew people and Jerusalem, and it's got to be the Holy Land. But do you know the world thinks it's the Holy Land? And how would Zechariah have known that? Only God told him. See, right now, Christians think, oh man, when I left Leonard at the airport last Friday, I said, put me in your suitcase. I want to go with you. And I told him when he was leaving, and I hope he remembers, I want him to take a picture on the Mount of Olives facing Jerusalem. Just think about that picture, right? Because that's where Jesus left. That's where he's coming back. I want to know what the visual looks like, kind of thing, right? Because it's the Holy Land he's pointing into, you know? So as a believer, believers flock there. They take tons of visits. I mean, that place is the traveler's paradise of the world. Let's all go to Jerusalem. The Jews today even say next year in Jerusalem. What they're saying is basically we'll all meet next year in Jerusalem. How about the Muslims? Next to Mecca, this place it's it. You know, there used to be an old Jewish joke too, where a Catholic and a rabbi are having a discussion about talking with God. And the Catholic says, when I'm in Rome, I just pick up the phone and I talk to God. And the Jew says, I don't even need any money. I don't have to pick up a phone. It's a direct call from where I live. Because why? It's the Holy Land. God's there. Everybody expects God's presence there. People even say, oh, I just want to get baptized in the Jordan. Why? I mean, the Jordan, from what I've heard, I haven't been there, it's not the prettiest and it's pretty filthy. You know, I mean, you're not going to, no, don't do the sprinkle and move on. I'm not getting in that water. But to people all over the world, it's just like, oh, I want to go there. It's going to be some, no, I'm not knocking it because I would like to go too. But I think that's truly what we think of Israel today is it's the Holy Land. But it's not going to be the Holy Land until we see this picture. When Jesus returns and he's in the midst of them and he's seated as king and he's chose Jerusalem. That's what he says. He will again choose Jerusalem. So that's when it'll be truly holy because he'll be there. His presence will be there. I don't think anything, somebody comes back and says, look, I got a whole bunch of sand from the Holy Land. It's holy sand. No, it isn't. It's sand. Or water. I know on TV for a while they were selling on holy water straight from the promised land, right straight from Israel. You could buy this holy water. How did you know, what is it, certified in there that it's from, they got it from the tap and sent it to you. I don't know where they got it from. But people want it because why? There's something about that land. Well, of course, because that's where he's going to rule and reign from. So kind of grab that as we look at that. It will be truly the Holy Land when he's there. If you read it in Hebrew, this sentence here, it says his portion on the land of the holiness. So basically when he's there, that land becomes holy because he's there. Verse 13, real quick. It says, be silent, all flesh, before the Lord, for he is aroused from his holy habitation. Again, what's going to require from the people and the masses? When he's ruling and reigning, there's going to be reverence and awe. Look at, I think what helps us is the picture of the servant here in Isaiah 52. If you want to go there, 52:15, or you just listen. Thus he will sprinkle many nations. Kings will shut their mouths on account of him. So when Jesus is coming and ruling and reigning, he will sprinkle many nations. The kings will shut their mouths on account of him. Because why? They're not going to rule over him. They're going to be what? Submissive to him. For what had not been told them, they will see. And what they had not heard, they will understand. So the King of Kings is coming. And that shuts mouths. And I think that's the picture we have when the King of Kings returns. There'll be nothing to say by anyone. He's going to rule and reign, and when he makes a decision and a judgment, who's going to overrule him? Who's going to say, that's, my favorite saying, that's not fair. Oh, yeah, it is. Where has the judgment come from? I put this down. I said, when the Lord comes, His word will be final. You've seen the bumper sticker, the Lord said it, I believe it? This is going to be, His word will be final. Now, as a believer, I look at the Bible and I say His word's final, and some people don't look at it like that. They say, well, it's a possibility, it's a probability, it may not be His word. I don't think it's His word. And remember what this book is about. This book is about the Lord remembering. And He remembers everything and how people reacted to Him. So, let's go into chapter 4 briefly. Chapter 3. I don't want to skip 3. We'll go to 4 next week, maybe. When we're doing something like this, it's very hard to make a quick transition. But remember, this is all one night. So for him, he's going from vision to vision to vision. I don't know how he did it. I don't know how they were given to him. I don't know what time period they were given. One of the things I'm thinking about is I had a pretty restless night last night. So I was up a couple of different times. And if there's a vignette here and a vignette here, and then you took a little nap and a vignette here, I don't know. It could be something like that. I don't know how he wrote it down. I don't know how he recalled it. But it's pretty vivid, some of these pictures that we have. And I really know that the Holy Spirit's involved because the Holy Spirit inspired His Word, so He's going to remember it and write it down. But so far we've had at least 3 or 4 visions previous to this. It depends on how you count them. And all the visions were external blessings. They were all regarding the land, the peoples around them, the nations around them. It was detailing, we had details of the history of Jerusalem and the restoration of the nation. We've seen how enemies would be destroyed and crushed by God. We've seen that the city was being rebuilt and would be rebuilt and the people would be restored. We've seen the past glory of Israel had faded, and now at some point the glory will return in the person of Christ, in person of their King. Let's do that, their Messiah. And that God would be in their midst. We've seen that. We also see that the Lord is the protector of this nation, and since He dwells later, He will be dwelling in their midst. They won't need any walls. He will be their wall. He will be their judge. He'll bring the fire that protects them. And we can come up with many more things, but not if we went outside of Zechariah. And this is all meant, and this is meant to encourage the returnees and to encourage more to come in. And again, the returnees, if we were doing this, you can get it listed, but the returnees went like this. The first set of returnees came under Zerubbabel, about 538 BC. So the first set is 538 BC. That's pretty much what we're dealing with in Zechariah. The second set will be with Ezra in 458 BC. So there's another 80 years take, and there's a group more that comes with Ezra. But still there's no wall. Nehemiah's got a burden for the wall. Nehemiah talks to the king, and Nehemiah comes about 14 years later in 444 BC. These aren't exact dates, they're real close. There's problems with calendars. So the last set of returnees come with Nehemiah. They're the builders. They're coming to build the wall. And we know at that point, if you remember Zechariah, Nehemiah, they were building with a trowel in one hand and a spear in the other. They were ready to fight at any moment and lay down mortar. What a great picture that is. Then Sanballat will come over and hassle them while they're building. And it's interesting as we see how that unfolds. But the edict was given for them to return that was predicted by Jeremiah that Cyrus would say, go return. Now Cyrus is a Persian, and he tells them in 538 to go ahead and return and gives it. It's interesting how God does things. When they left Egypt, the Egyptians gave them money to leave by. I think if Trump becomes president, if he wants people to leave, give them money. Not going to happen, but either side is not going to happen. But when Cyrus also told the Jews they could return, not asked them, he told them they could return, he gave them stuff to leave with, which is kind of neat, how God works. And they started rebuilding the temple in 536 BC, and they stopped rebuilding it for 14 years until Haggai comes along and kind of push starts them, and the rebuild restarts about 520 BC, finishes about 520 BC, under both Zechariah's and Haggai's ministry. It starts about 520 BC and finishes in 516, 515 BC. Again, problems with calendars, but we're shooting close, okay? Ezra then comes about 457, 458 BC, and he teaches the people because they had forgotten their language. It's interesting. What were they doing between these times? Did you ever think to yourself, what were they missing? What were they missing? They had some of the physical, they had some of the moral aspects, right? They were missing the spiritual aspect. Their priests were writing books. Haggai was writing a book. Zechariah was writing a book. I really feel this is a historical person. In chapter 3, it talks about Joshua the high priest. And what were they doing? What were they high priesting at? What were they priesting at? There was no temple. There was sacrifices sort of being made, but in order to understand the full sacrificial system, come on Sundays. We're going to be starting that in a couple of weeks. We'll get a whole grasp of the whole sacrificial system. But it just wasn't about a priest or a high priest. There was no spirituality in this city. All they had was the voice of the prophets. And how were they responding to the prophets? So the scene opens up here in chapter 3 with an unusual kind of way of bringing it. The focal point is pretty much the Temple Mount, because it's talking about Joshua the high priest. He wouldn't work in downtown. You kind of think about this. Where would you expect to find the high priest? In the temple. Somewhere in the courtyard, somewhere in the vicinity of the temple. They didn't roam far from the temple. We know that there's divisions of the priesthood by this time, so that there's certain divisions worked at certain times. And we know that the high priest went into the Holy of Holies once a year. Since they had no temple for at least 100 years now, give or take. About 603, I think, it was destroyed. And we're about 514 it's built, so give or take 90 years, whatever. What were they doing? What was the spirituality like? What were they doing? And it's a good question to ask somebody that's a Hebrew today. What do you do about your sins? Isn't that kind of a loaded question? Kind of think about it. We have an answer, right? Jesus died for my sins. He made full payment. We have been bought with a price, right? We got all these great answers. But the Hebrew then and the Hebrew now can't answer that question. What do you do about your sins? And God what? Hates sin. See, God initially, and again, another commercial, I'll throw it in again. God initially gave Israel an approach to Him. It was called the Levitical system, surrounding a tabernacle with a priesthood and sacrifices that went with it. But if there's no temple, and there's no real priesthood, and there's no real sacrifice, where's sin? How do you deal with sin? See, Israel had learned a lesson from their captivity. They would never again return to idolatry. They had learned somewhat of a lesson that they had forsaken the Lord's Sabbath. But I see no sign of them keeping it after it, though. They didn't understand the fullness of the Abrahamic covenant, or they would have returned to the land. Because that hadn't happened. And if a return hadn't happened, where are they spiritually at this time? For Israel's restoration to happen, this is what you need to understand. For Israel's restoration to happen, and for the king to come, Israel's sin has to be dealt with as a nation, individually and as a nation. Has to be dealt with. They have to be restored because they are called a kingdom of priests. And when you go to chapter 3, verse 1, it opens up with the representative Joshua, the high priest. It's not about Joshua. It's about what he represents. In this picture, he's representing spiritual Israel. What is Israel doing spiritually? Let's do it that way. We do spiritual Israel, somebody's going to think it's like, oh, they're in my head, kind of thing. Israel's called a kingdom of priests in Exodus 19 and in Isaiah 1:26. Here, in verses 1 and 2, Joshua was compared to Israel. So let's just read these first two verses and get a grasp of what's going on and see what unfolds. It says in verse 1 and 2, "Then he showed me Joshua the high priest standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan standing at his right hand to accuse him." So again, the picture is the angel of the Lord, who we already talked about ad nauseum, I think, but it's a great subject, is Jesus Christ pre-incarnate. Before him is Joshua the high priest, who takes from the people and goes to the Lord. Prophet takes from the Lord, goes to the people, right? We got that aspect. So he's representing the people before the Lord, and standing next to the Lord is Satan. Does that blow your mind yet? Should. We're going to get a good lesson about how and where Satan's allowed. But verse 2 says, "And the Lord said to Satan," interesting, who initiated the conversation? I want you to get this. Every time you see the Lord and Satan together, Satan doesn't say, hey! He is silent. The Lord initiates. Just think about it. Then we take that to Matthew chapter 4 and Luke chapter 4, and Satan is going to tempt Jesus. Who initiates that conversation? Satan. He doesn't know his place, does he? Yes, he does. On this earth, he rules. On this earth, he rules. He's allowed to initiate. In the universal aspect and what we're dealing with, he cannot. Anyway, subject for another time, but verse 2 says, "And the Lord said to Satan, the Lord rebuke you, Satan. Indeed, the Lord who has chosen Jerusalem rebuke you." So he's talking about, in the same aspect of Joshua the high priest, he's talking about Jerusalem. Is this not a brand plucked from the fire? So again, what he's talking about, the very aspects we need to see and grasp more than anything as this picture unfolds before us. And the question that we have before us is, God is holy and righteous. How is he to restore a sinful people to his place and be consistent with his character? How can God overlook sin? How is Israel, a better question, how is Israel or an Israelite or anyone to be cleansed from their sins? So we have as a picture of the adversary here. The first biblical appearance, if we were going to go chronology, would be Genesis chapter 3. But he's not called Satan there at the very start. He's called what? The serpent. Okay? But that's his initial appearance. His first biblical appearance, and what I mean by that, because if we were going order, I think Job was written before Genesis, or at least put out before that time period. Let's just look at that real quick, because I think we need to see this before we get in. Go to Job chapter 1. And the only reason we're going to it is because the same kind of idea is happening here. There's a conversation between God and Satan. And later, if you can get your mind wrapped around this while you're turning to Job chapter 1, Peter's going to say something, and Jesus is going to say, Satan has wanted to sift you like wheat, but I have prayed for you. So, I want you to get the place of Satan, because I think sometimes in today's church, Satan's given a bigger theater than he should get. Okay? And at the same time, God allows certain things to happen. And we got to look at this and grab this and grasp what God does. Verse 6, Job 1:6. "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them." Now Satan separated out from that. He's still an angelic being, although fallen, but he's allowed in the presence of God. Talk about grace. Not for salvation, but God could have just annihilated him right then and there. Verse 7 says, and the Lord said to Satan, notice the initiator of the conversation. And again, God doesn't need this information. He needs Satan to respond. It's an authority question. In other words, he didn't say, oh, were you playing hide and seek? I didn't know where you've been, Satan. He says, from where do you come? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, from roaming about the earth and walking around it. Where's his domain? In a good Spanish word, aquí. He's here. He even tells you where he's at. Probably on TV on Sunday mornings. I don't know. Just me thinking. But he says he's been on the earth walking around on it. That's just scary enough. But we give him too much credit because the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? In other words, when you've been doing your walking, have you checked out Job? He says, for there is no one like him on the earth. This is God giving a report. Wouldn't you like God to give a report and say, there's no one like him. He's blameless and upright, fearing God and turning from evil. What great 4 points. That'd be a great 4-point sermon, wouldn't it? I want to be Job-like. This is what God thinks of Job. And here's what Satan answered. Does Job fear God for nothing? Hast thou not made a hedge about him and his house and all he has on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But put forth your hand from him now and touch all he has, and he will surely curse thee to your face. Now, understand something. Everybody says, pray a hedge around you. Where'd that come from? Whose voice said that just now? Satan said that. God didn't say, oh, you're right, I got a hedge around him. He never said he's right. What the Lord did say, though, behold, all that he has is in your power. Only do not put forth your hand on him. So Satan departed from the presence of the Lord. So we have a picture here of Satan and a conversation with God. And what does he present himself as? He presents himself as the accuser, the adversary, the opposer, the oppressor. Okay, but God is the initiator, and I want us to see this. Even though he's the accuser, God has only allowed his presence because of God's divine prerogative. He can't do anything he wants to do. So when people say, oh, Satan did this, and I remember we were at a board meeting it was an open board meeting at a church. In other words, everybody was invited to it. A few people came and said, all these things are happening because Satan's oppressing this church. Way back when I said, why would you give him credit? Can you just believe we're dealing with people that are people? Oh no, it's got to be satanic. Why? I don't want to give him credit. The only one that knows this is us because we read Job. What did Job know? They didn't know any of this. See, we know this. We have divine insight because God gave us the book. But Job didn't know what was happening. So Job wasn't saying, oh, this is all. Nowhere in this book does Job ever say, this is going to pass. Satan's doing this to me. He never gives Satan credit, does he? We shouldn't either. We shouldn't either. Job says, exactly, God is doing it because why? God is sovereign and God is in control of everything. And it's interesting. We know this about Satan. And one of the things I should have brought up Sunday, not only is God the initiator, but Satan stands against God in everything he does, so he even takes forms as an idol. You know, idolatry is demonic. It's demons. And I'll probably say it again Sunday. And notice when we said in Exodus 20, verse 3, it says, I will have no other gods against me or opposed to me. Who's opposed to God? Satan. He's the god of this what? World. Isn't that fascinating stuff? And so having another god basically is satanic. Revelation 12:10 calls him the great accuser. It's interesting, the word for accuser, categor, where we get category from. And you say, well, wow, that's like divinely inspired stuff. Let me just, because it's getting interesting, the time. What the word category means is any general or comprehensive division. Think about this. You're going to categorize. What does Satan do? He divides. He divides. So here in the opening scene, Satan is standing before the angel of the Lord on his right hand to resist. He's taking a stand. I know it says Joshua standing, but remember, when it says here, and we'll finish here in Zechariah chapter 3, verse 1, it says Joshua is standing before the Lord. Notice what it says, before the Lord. Okay? And that's kind of a similar word that we looked at in Exodus 20 Sunday. That means alongside or in alliance with God. And Satan standing at the right hand to accuse him. So we already know what Satan's doing at the right hand, which is a place of what? When we talk about the right hand of the God Almighty, what did the disciples ask for? Can we sit at your right hand? Well, here would be the angel of the Lord, which is Christ. So that's kind of what the premise we started with. It would be a pre-incarnate picture of Christ. But still, He's the King of Kings. He's standing at the right hand. That's what the disciples asked for, which is interesting. But He said He's there at that place to accuse. To accuse. So the three things I want to leave with real quick. It's kind of hard to stop here, but I'm going to stop. Satan's only job is to be in opposition. It's interesting because the word here that it says Satan at his right hand, it's basically, the word Satan is used twice. It means, in the Hebrew it says Satan, Amed Yamin, Satan. The kind of a similar word, the only difference is vowel points. Okay? So one would be Satan or Satan and Satan. So it's almost the same word. It's just a vowel point that's different. So the one that's Satan is the resistor is Satan. Satan is resistor. Kind of idea. Opposer. He's also an adversary. Because it says here he's the accuser. And in Psalm 106 verse 9, he's also known as the, verse 6, 109 verse 6, he's also known as the resistor or opposer. So what's he doing here? Why is Satan even allowed in this picture? What's the point? And we'll pick up with that next week. We didn't get very far, but I like the next verse because it opens up, rebuke you, Satan. How many people have heard this in today's movements? Rebuke Satan. Not your job. You're going in a real firefight with a squirt gun. It ain't going to work. It's God's job to rebuke Satan. You're in Christ. Let Christ deal with it. Nowhere does it say, you go rebuke him. We'll talk about that next week. That'll be some application for next week. Father God, we thank you for this time. Again, appreciative of the prophet Zechariah as he's unfolded what is your history for us, for our future. Father, knowing the things that you're going to take care of does bring comfort, does bring encouragement, not only to the people of Israel that it should have brought it to, but it brings encouragement to us that knowing that you have a plan and a reason for the existence of that nation, and as long as they're around, your word will not fail. In Jesus' name, amen.